Africans were placed on ships, and these were not big ships. Sometimes you would have 800 to 1,000 people packed on a ship. And you have to understand this business. You go get 100 people off the streets of Liverpool in England, and you say to them you want to make some money. You know, these people were not professional sailors, not all of them. Maybe the person who was the captain of the ship. But these are hoodlums, hooligans, right? You want to get some people unemployed. You want to make some money. Come on board my ship. And not only come on board my ship, but let's go to Africa. We get people in Africa, take these people to the West Indies or to the Americas, trade them, or in their language, sell them, and then go build us a house in Rhode Island. You know, with a captain's outlook, lookout. You know, this was the business. This was the Europeans' answer to what would later be go west, young man. This was the dream, the vision for 400 years of involvement. How do you make it? How do you expand? Because the whole notion, of course, of imperialism was expansion, and this is one way. I mean, you can make some money. And basically, that was the motive that drove the whole process. But then, you're talking human beings put on a ship, and let me tell you how they were put on a ship, because when you start talking about it, that's why I always honor the ancestors. Because you have to understand that people were not, there were no luxury, these were no luxury liners. You know, you're not talking about electricity, electric lights, and you got your own private berth, and there's none of that. You don't have any movies on these ships, dance halls. These ships were designed simply for the transport of human beings, as many human beings as possible, in as small a space as possible. That was the idea. In order for a ship to get a full load, sometimes these European soldiers, sailors, would have to wait for 4 and 5 months until they got enough people to fill the ship. The people that they would capture would be locked up in prisons. I've been in them. Some of you have been in them. Cape Coast Castle, Elmina, Goree, Ouida, Bonny. All these are just lined up. In fact, along the coast of Ghana itself, there are 30 of them. You walk in them and you still smell the stench of human flesh in 1991. And the European slave trade supposedly ended in 1808 on the high seas. But you still smell the strong stench of human flesh. If you walk right in them now, our children don't know that. They need to walk in those slave castles and fortresses. And they need to get that feeling, you see? Because part of our insanity as a people is our dislocation. Because we have forgotten how we have become alienated from ourselves and from our own historical experiences. And when you walk in a place like that, it brings you right back to reality. You understand everything. Look at this. When we were placed on those ships, we were not placed on those ships standing up. People didn't stand up on the ship. People didn't sit on the ships in terms of with seats and chairs and rocking chairs, soft cushions and sofas. People were packed like on ledgers, on shelves. 18 inches every person had, 18 inches. And you were sort of like you had to slide in your 18 inches, and there were only about 12 inches between you and the next shelf, you see. So, they had 4 and 5 shelves. And everybody would get in those places, and you would wait there. And they would let you out 1 hour a day for exercise so you won't die. If you died, then that meant that, of course, they couldn't get any money for you. So there we were on the ships, packed in, 18 inches. That's all the African had. No, I'm telling you, they call this the dreaded Middle Passage. This is what the Africans named it. We named it the dreaded Middle Passage because it would sometimes take 25 to 80 days to cross the Atlantic, depending on the weather. If you ran into a storm and got thrown off coast, it may take you 80 days. And can you imagine the horror and the terror of the nights with no lights, compelled to moan their long hours of the night away with sometimes not even a drop of water to quench their thirst? Our ancestors vowed in those dark, damp holes of horror that they would be free one day. But think of it. Can you imagine that when someone would die next to you, you would be happy for the person and say, "Gone she to her own country," or "Gone he to his own friends"? You would be so happy. They were released from this misery. The Middle Passage was so horrible that 2 Africans who wrote about it, the Weldons, they wrote that one day the captain of the ship they were on was unable to feed a baby. The baby wouldn't eat. This baby was about a year old. And when he couldn't get the baby to eat, he tried to force the mother to feed the baby. And she tried to get the baby to eat, the baby wouldn't eat. And he took the baby by the feet and dropped it head first onto the deck of the ship. They tell this, Sarah and Jacob Weldon. And the baby died. And then they forced the mother to take the corpse, to throw it overboard. She refused and was beaten. And then finally, after they had beaten her so badly, she took the corpse of her baby, which she was so attached to, and with her eyes averted so that she might not see, dropped the small corpse overboard into the ocean. And every time I fly over the Atlantic, and I just came back last week, I tell you, I think of the many thousands, maybe millions of Africans who were lost in the Middle Passage, the dreaded Middle Passage. One captain of a ship who was running out of water, trying to decide what to do, took 144 Africans out of a load of 400 and threw the 144 over just so he could conserve water. This is all written in the history books. It's for everybody. You can get it. But our children are never taught it in school. White people are never taught it in school either. They don't get this version of history. That's the real history. And so consequently, when our children do not have that understanding, they know nothing. If they understood the dreaded Middle Passage, then their attitudes toward excellence would be different. Their ideas about success and succeeding and their motivation would be different, because they would have a clearer understanding of what Africans have been up against. The dreaded Middle Passage it was called. But let me tell you something. When the ship reached the other side, we were often very happy when the ship reached the other side. We could say, you know, nothing could be as bad as the Middle Passage. It's over. It's going to be light now. And soon as Africans stepped off of the shore, onto the shore, we discovered that the Middle Passage was nothing compared to what was going to happen. Now, let me just tell you about this process. The process in the first place of ripping people away from their home was a physical dislocation. What I mean by that, it was like tearing you away from your family, from the place you knew, from your customs, from your traditions, from your religion, from your activities, from all the things you knew. Just ripping you away against your will. It's not one of these places where you want to go. Just ripped away against your will. That's the first tearing apart. Then, after ripping you away, putting you through the dreaded terror of the Middle Passage. And you have to remember, males were shackled with chains on the ankle and on the wrist. Females were transported nude, naked. This is all in the books. And so sometimes you have to understand, you got to understand a whole lot. You see a brother walking like this. What do you think he's doing? He's throwing the chains. He's throwing the coffins. But he's forgot the meaning. He doesn't know the meaning anymore. He's just walking like that. But that's the way African men who were chained from ankle to ankle, that's the way we made the load easier by throwing the chain together in unison. And so when you understand that, it gives you an appreciation for the cultural aspects of the society that we think we've forgotten or don't know. But it's all there. It's just never been taught to us. But on the other side, what we discovered was that after the dreaded Middle Passage, there would come what was called the breaking period. And the breaking period was to take an African and to reduce an African to a thing. You humiliate the woman before the man. You humiliate the man before the woman. You do anything to them. You make them lower than dogs. You spit on them. You have them to fight their mothers and their fathers. You create all kind of havoc to destroy their wills. And once their wills have been destroyed, and they will follow every command you give, you say you have successfully broken the Mandinka. You now have a slave. You have a person enslaved in mind, enslaved in body, who will believe that anything the master wants done, he or she will do, without question. That was what happened. In fact, that breaking period was so awful that many people who saw it happening or occurring turned around as they did Let me tell you something. Our children don't know this story because I talk to them every day. You talk to them. They don't know this story. It's not on television. It's not on prime time. You don't have it in the books. Mothers would go out to the fields to work, leave their own children, come back in the evening and find their children dead. That's what it was. It wasn't fun. We need to teach this story to understand. And let me tell you, and I'll come back to this, but let me tell you what some of this impact has been on America. More than 100 African ethnic groups were brought to this country. Just this one. And you can talk about, for example, all the Caribbean islands. You can talk about South America, Brazil. There are more Africans in Brazil than here. You can talk about Panama, Guatemala. You can talk about Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Suriname. All Africans brought all across the Atlantic. Same story. Same incidents. Same struggle, same courage. But understand that when we were brought and transported here to this side, with the problems of the enslavement itself, came also enormous creativity. And what you saw tonight, when you heard those sisters sing, was a direct result of the Middle Passage. That was a crossing. That was a cross, and that's why what we did with what was African music was different than what you hear if you'd never gone through the Middle Passage. Or how you say if you'd never gone through the Middle Passage. That was evidence of it. But not only that, it's what we did out of those 100 ethnic groups with our language itself. That itself is a contribution. You saw it with the folk tale and Brer Rabbit and Abika Anderson's story. You heard it in her voice, how we took the language, this language that was not ours, and we made this language something that it would never have been. We made it a language that you could communicate with. We took the sterility out of it. I mean, understand this. The difficulty of that is so great that what you have to say about us is that it was a creation of genius. Probably next to music, what we did with language is one of the greatest things that a people have ever done. I mean, just to illustrate with you, you take the Yoruba language is different from the Tree language that's spoken by the Fanti and the Asante. And that language is different from the language spoken by the Wolof of Senegal. There are 3 different languages. I'm telling you, 100 different African ethnic groups. In Yoruba, you say, Shalafianit. How are you? In Wolof, you say, Nagadef. In a Tree, you say, Wahodesen. They don't sound anything alike. In fact, Arabic and Hebrew are closer. Shalom, salam. But you can't get Wahodesen and Shalafianit. How are you going to? Those languages were different. The people were black. But we came from more than 100 ethnic groups. And yet, the genius of that was to take our own languages, interact with English as this before. Look at it. We kept the structure of the West African languages and the rhythm of the West African languages, and we took on English words. And so that's why people get confused. Sometimes they think we're trying to speak English. People get confused. They say, well, it sounds like English, sort of, And coming from Georgia, see, where we spoke Geechee, I started to say Gullah because that's what they say in universities. I hadn't heard that until I went to university. But trying to speak, when you hear Geechee, and you're speaking that language, and it's a beautiful language. There is nothing more for me. Maybe the music, but after the music, nothing more beautiful than my language. If I'm at Dr. Tager's house, and she said, Molefi, would you care for another drink of wine? If I've had enough, I say, no, thank you, I'm fine. But say I was at Dr. Phoenix's house, and she said, Molefi, would you care for another drink of wine? If I had enough, I say, if you had asked me before, I might have could, but I'm tore up now. Of the vowel. Whenever you're talking about something that is extreme or superlative, Africans make the vowels longer. It's the difference between saying, for example, I saw a long train, or saying, I saw a very long train. You see what I'm saying? The language, and you understand it because it's correct. It is what we have done with structure. That's an impact of the African influence on America. What we have done with the structure of the language. And we have done that through and through in every kind of thing. The young people do that now. Sometimes, I have to keep up, you have to keep up every week. Because you think that, I was telling somebody the other day when that person was egging somebody, I said, no, they're dissing him. So you have to, because the language changes. And I think that part of the creativity of the language might very well be, again, we may not even be at the end of that interaction of those 100 languages. We don't know. But we ought to understand the tremendous way that we have come. And let me go back to this story, and I won't be long. But let me go back to this story from there, but the language was important, and I wanted to do that because we need to understand that was an incredible creation, because people took the language and made things out of it. They made John Jasper, the great preacher, made the sun stop moving with language. You don't believe that, right? On the earth, whatever, with the language, just made it stop. That's what they said. That's the people who heard him. That's what they said. That's what they said. But it has always been that way. So that when the African person uses English, you have to understand that when in using English, we are using a language that's almost like a second language. Because the other language High sky stun. Sounds just like English. High sky stun. But you have to ask me, now, what does it mean? But it's simple words. High is H-O-W. Sky is S-K-Y. Stun is S-T-U-N. Simple. But most of us don't know what it means. Simple English word, right? English sentence. Question. But if you were in Charleston, a person would say blue. You know right away, right? You know that. You know right away. Because what you're doing here, again, it is how we are taking the language and we are making the language a new language. And this goes on all the time in communities, in places where people assemble for religion, wherever. This goes on, the language change. But that's also a direct result of what happened when the African got on this side. But let me just tell you quickly. The whole period between 1619 and 1865 was one long hell for black people. For 244 years, African people worked in this country from can't see in the morning to can't see at night for nothing. For 244 years, African people could never dream of being free. Husbands could never dream of being with their wives, and wives could never dream of being with their husbands without the uncertainty that one day one of them will be sold away to Arkansas or to Georgia or Alabama or Virginia, and you would never see them again. Parents could not live with the certainty that even if they gave birth to children, that they would see those children grow up, because the child could be sold to some other plantation and you never saw your child again. Mothers wept long hours in the night. Let me tell you something. If our children could understand that when African people picked cotton, worked in those fields, or worked building and constructing cities and buildings, that there were no hour limitations on how long you could work in Africa. In fact, there was a big debate among the whites in the 1840s about that, about whether or not it was more profitable to buy an African and work that African for 7 years real hard until he or she died and bought another one, or to keep an African working even until they got to be old, which was more profitable. There were scientific articles published by white people on this in economics. You can't forget this. If you forget this, there is cultural amnesia. There's psychological amnesia. There's all kinds of illnesses, mental illnesses that come with forgetting. You can't forget, our children can't forget it, because if they do, then they walk around insane. No roots at all. No understanding of why things are the way they are. And consequently, it creates more havoc within the community. We've got to instruct, and we've got to give these examples to them. Now let me go fast here. In 1863, Lincoln made a proclamation. This was the Emancipation Proclamation, and I don't have time to go through all the details of what happened up until that time, but that history is rich, and maybe another time we'll talk about that, because you need to know Charles Remond, and you need to know the name of David Walker. No more courageous man ever lived in this country than David Walker. You need to know him. You need to know Harriet Tubman. No greater person ever walked the soil of America than Harriet Tubman. You need to know Sojourner truth. And there are thousands of others whose names have been forgotten. You need to know the anonymous Africans who were persecuted and killed outside of media and outside of information. You need to understand that that has to be a part of your pattern of life. It's mine. I wake up thinking about it. I love Harriet Tubman because she first loved us. You got to understand that. That is fundamental. There can be no progress. There can be no true understanding without the first understanding of who you are and where you stand. That's fundamental. And so in 1863, when Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation, that was not, Africans were not freed. Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation really to punish the South for this talk about succeeding and secession and getting out of the Union. Says, okay, if you're going to do that, I'm going to take your Africans away from you. And they went out anyway. They kept fighting. It was 1865 when Africans were freed. And that freedom was not a freedom given to Africans. Understand that. The freedom that came in 1865 was freedom that came when 200,000 Africans, men and women, had fought for freedom. I mean, that's a sizable number out of 4 million. 200,000 Africans fought in the Civil War. Do you think they were fighting for the same thing the whites were? If you do, you're totally dislocated. No. In fact, the whites said so. The great General Sherman wrote to one of his generals, General McHood in Kentucky, and told him, don't accept the Negroes into your camps. If they walk into your camps, send them out of your camps. Send them back to their slave owners, or send them to the sheriff. They are none of our business, and our own soldiers will be confused as to why we are fighting. This is history. This is what Sherman said. When one general decided out in Missouri that he would just free the Africans, Fremont decided that he would just free the Africans who kept walking into his camps. Lincoln then wrote him a letter and said, you have no authority to free them. Send them back to their slave owners. It was only by some strange interpretation of law that Africans even were saved by the Union armies as camp. And that was when one general in Virginia saw so many Africans coming into his camp, running away from the plantation. He said to them, he said, I've got to decide how to deal with this. And his decision was that they are contraband of war. Now understand this. We need to understand what all this means. What he is saying is that the Africans who are running into his camp are just like a dog or a horse or a gun. Since the Southerners would use a horse to fight against the Union Army, or since they would use a dog to go and attack the Union Army, or since they would use a gun to shoot the Union Army, it is also possible that they would use a Negro in their language to also attack the Union Army. So we are just capturing them as contraband of war. That's how we were saved when we ran away. That was a new interpretation of the law which Lincoln went along with. Let me tell you one more point on this, and then we're going to bring this to an end. before this war, thousands of Africans went off to freedom on their own. You've heard of the Underground Railroad? Well, it was only partly true. That's part of the romance of writing American history, to talk about an underground railroad. There was one, I think. And I say I think. I think Harriet Tubman had one because she made 19 trips. And I think she knew where to stop and which house to go to and which building and school to go to. But I dare say that when a brother or a sister down in Alabama or Georgia decided to run away from the plantation, that they didn't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to run away. Now, which good white folks' house I can stop at tonight? That would have been an African out of his mind. He would have been crazy. Can you imagine that? You don't know. You just going to decide that you're going to stop somewhere at somebody's house. Most of the Africans who escaped to the north did so on their own wit and by their own ingenuity, with no one to help them except the almighty sources of the universe. You have to understand that. Otherwise, you'll buy into an idea that there were a whole lot of white folk waiting around to help Africans escape. If that was the case, we would have been free much longer, earlier. But there were some. And in those cases, after people had made many trips, they knew where they were. And they knew the Quakers, for example, had many people involved in it. And so some people knew. But all people didn't escape to Philadelphia. In fact, people went the other way. So you had, and people went to the West. You had to understand that Africans were involved in a process here that depended on African intelligence and ingenuity and courage. And there are some stories that our children should know about that. They got to know the story of Henry Box Brown, who just put himself in a box and shipped himself to freedom. They need to know. They need to know the stories of the Africans, man and woman who loved each other. She was fair complexion and he was dark, who escaped to freedom, he being or acting as if he were her servant. They need to understand these stories. They need to understand the story of the Africans who walked 400 miles out of the way just to get to Cincinnati. These stories, I didn't learn these stories when I was going to school. I didn't learn these stories at UCLA. It was after I got out of school that I learned these. But it ought to be in school. I ought to be able to read about that. So then when we come down to the freedom of Africans in 1865, jubilation. Africans were happy. This was a time. People then did things that were incredible. Old people, 65, 70 years old, would walk 25 miles just to go to school so they could learn how to read the Bible before they died. Young people, old people, husbands and wives, children decided they would go and look for their relatives. So you had wives suddenly free in Virginia saying, well, about 4 years ago, my husband was sold down to Texas. I'm going to go down there and see if I can find him. You had children who said, my mother remained in Tennessee while I was sold, or we were sold to Georgia. We're going to go back to that old plantation and see if we could look around there and find our mother. That's the way it was. Africans went looking for each other. You had this mass of humanity after 1865 looking for each other. This is why we say today, hey bro, hey sister. Because it may be true. You don't know. It's true. We don't know. That is precisely why we have these things in our culture. That was the most incredible period. People looking and trying to find, and that was also the period, by the way, in which they set up the first police forces in this country. That was also the period in which they passed the laws against lottery in public places. Because Africans would stand around on the street corners looking for their people. And you had to have a police force. During slavery, there didn't have to be a police force, you see. They didn't have police force. Police forces came afterwards. And in the end, we put back together a semblance of something that we had before the 244 years of enslavement. In the end, we took up our nickels and pennies and dimes and put it in collection plates and built more than 100 colleges and called them, some of them with great audacity, universities. That's what we did. That was the spirit of the people. So close to the enslavement and so knowledgeable of what had happened. Are we now so far away that we do not have that same spirit? Our children must know this story. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet brought us to the place for which our parents sighed? We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. Thank you.
Dr. Asante has agreed to take 3 questions. And I know there must be hundreds, but if someone has a question that they'd like to ask Professor Asante, we can take 3 questions. Okay? Could you?
I would like to know the whole of the religion to free the slave in America.
Could you repeat it, please? Yeah, we told there it is. Thank you.
I would like to know the word of the religion.
Not on.
Okay?
Word. All right. In what?
They were freeing the slaves.
The question was, what was the role of religion in freeing the Africans from bondage? Well, I think the role was certainly complicated. I mean, there were certain religious groups that participated in certainly developing a consciousness of what was happening to Africans in this country. I mean, and I think that religion in that sense might be said to have played a role. However, on the other hand, there were certain churches that were firmly entrenched in the enslavement process itself. And some churches even split over it. you still have the split in certain denominations in this country over whether or not they supported the enslavement of Africans or not. And that's why when you talk about American history, you can't talk about American history apart from the enslavement. I mean, that's the biggest thing that this country, I mean, in terms of this country, almost everything relates to it. You talk about the churches, you talk about religion, you're talking about whether they were for or against. And so the role of the churches in that sense is a complicated one. Now, on another end of it, if you talk about African religion and the role that the African religion played, I think the role of African religion was fundamental. And it was fundamental because many of the leaders who struggled often, people like Nat Turner, for example, were deeply involved in the religious experience. So whether you take Sojourner Truth, I mean, Harriet, Tubman, some people call these people mystics, but they did acknowledge sometimes a certain identification with certain denominations. But for the most part, they were practicing African religion. So African religion played some role in it in terms of that. All right, is there another question? Yes, sir.
If you could give us the
This guy's a friend of mine. He doesn't need to ask me anything. He always does it. Why are you going to ask me a question?
What I want to do, at First World, one day you gave the lineage of Shaka Zulu compared to people that know the Judo Christian.
Right, that's right.
If you would give us the lineage of Shaka Zulu here.
Well, that's a good point. This is a good question. What I normally do, I always say, sometimes I say normally, is what he's saying is that we sometimes, and this relates to the religious question and also to the historical question, is that sometimes we know more about other things than we know about our own history. And the example that I sometimes use is that we do not know, for example, the lineage of Shaka, who was the great king of the Zulu people. That we don't know the names of the people like Ntombela, for example, or Languli, and Ntombezi, and Zulu, out of which Shaka came. But we would know all kinds of other names of kings of England and kings. I mean, we would know all that, but we don't know our own history. And whether you take the same lineage from the kings of Mali, Mansa Musa and Abubakar and so on, we don't know those. Or the queens of Africa, we don't know. I mean, we do get confused by thinking sometimes that Cleopatra was a great queen. Cleopatra didn't do anything. Can you think of anything she did? She's a media event. She's a media event, and the only thing that I can think of that she did was to romp around with Mark Antony. But we get that from, So Newsweek asked a question about Cleopatra, whether she was black or white or that kind of thing. My point is, it's irrelevant in her case. That the great queens of Africa, like Nzinga or Hatshepsut, or the Queen Mother, Yao Asantewa, Queen Tai, Nefertari. I mean, there are all kinds of other people you can name rather than naming it, but that was Elizabeth Taylor who gave us that. Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering, since we were forcibly removed from Africa, and probably many of us had property and things there, do you think that as African Americans that we could go back and make any claims?
I think that's a good question. His question was, since we were forcibly removed from the continent of Africa and from various places, can we go back and make some claims? The concept of property, of course, like we have in the West, they didn't have and don't have, well, they now are beginning to get it, didn't have in Africa at that time, because actually the land belonged, much like the Native American concept here, the land belonged to the ancestors and you couldn't buy or sell it. The Europeans came over there and put up that whole system of buying and selling land and so on. But I think the claim that can be made is that one can go back to the continent of Africa and say, you know, we were taken forcibly from our mothers and fathers' home, and now we come back to see what you're doing with it. And not only what you're doing with it, we also want to share in building it and developing it. I think that can happen. I mean, whenever I go to Africa, and I go quite often, I always go with that attitude. And that attitude is that I'm an African person, and I don't need anybody to tell me from there or here whether or not I'm an African. I know who I am.
Thank you very much. Let's give it up one more time for Dr. Okay, now, I hope that you are all firmly planted in your seats because we have another very great treat coming for you in the Medgar Evers College Gospel Choir. But I would like to also at this time acknowledge the presence of two other of our elected officials, the Honorable State Senator Marty Markowitz and the Honorable Governor Montgomery. At this time, before the choir comes out, there's a group of 7 young ladies that if I don't say their names, I won't be able to go home tonight. And those are the 7 young ladies who've been serving as our hostesses this evening. For those of you who did not get a chance to tour the Africana Resource Center prior to the program, we do invite you, following the Medgar Evers College Gospel Chorus, to come back and tour the Africana Resource Center. 7 young ladies who've been serving as our hostesses this evening are, and it's in no particular order because I didn't write them down. Miss Nikki Stanley, is Nikki here? There's Nikki. Miss Marissa Moses. Asha Ivy. Aisha Pugh. Jennifer Hazelwood. And the 2 reasons I couldn't go home unless I did this, my older daughter, Christina Phoenix, and my younger daughter, Cherie Phoenix. They will be happy to take you on a tour of the center. And now, without further ado, I think they're ready. Let's enjoy the spiritually uplifting Medgar Evers College